Street Fighter 2. It wasn't the first fighting game, but it was arguably the most successful of the time. It set the standard, from directional inputs, button layout, and basic fight mechanics. I was born in '84, but didn't really start living until '91 when Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior hit the arcades. I can still remember spending countless hours having my lunch money stolen a quarter at a time by strangers, and I loved every minute of it. Street Fighter 2 was church, and I was religious as fuck. I made my offerings of sweat, secondhand smoke, and calluses. I loved everything about the game. The characters, the music, the stages, it was perfect. In fact, the original 8 characters have become so popular that they've become archetypes in the genre. Capcom knew they had a winning formula, and what does a business do when they find a consumer psychological G-spot? Yep, they rung that bell well past the refractory period. The release of Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition in 1992 felt bigger than it was. I mean, they reused the intro of the World Warrior, made some small tweaks to the fight systems and animation, unlocked the bosses Velrog, Vega, Sagat, and Bison, and let you and your opponent play the same character. Yeah, it was pretty much the same game. Yeah, it was basically low-effort DLC or a content patch by today's standards, but the 90s were a different time, and I was there for it. Feeling pressure from third-party hacks of the game, Capcom followed this up with Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, a release so pointless that the whole world let out a collective sigh large enough to grow the hole in the ozone layer.
Uh-oh.
Then, in 1993, the world stopped when Time Warner released the Beanie Babies, creating a collecting craze that would lift more people out of poverty than industrialization. But that year also saw the release of Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, which added 4 more stereotypes into the game. Many of these characters will end up being classics in their own right. And, to be fair, look at the new intro Capcom did. Yeah, I mean, look at it. It's a little slow, but hey, it's new. The intro to this game had more effort spent on it than the entirety of Hyper Fighting. Capcom got more mileage out of the pre-93 intro than Goutier's chart topper, Somebody That I Used to Know, which spent 18 weeks in the top 10. But, in my opinion, it wasn't enough. And I remember that is when the jokes about how Capcom couldn't count to 3 began. But hey, really, Capcom, you can't just keep adding subtitles and adjectives in front of Street Fighter, right? In 1994, the unthinkable happened, and Calgene, based out of California, created the first genetically engineered tomatoes, turning this parody movie into a true-to-life documentary. But also Super Street Fighter 2 took the world by storm. And O.J. Simpson was on his way to the biggest upset since Tyson v. Douglas. His book, If I Did It, would go on to be the most disturbing endzone dance ever. This was peak Street Fighter 2, and the iterative tick-tick-tick of Capcom led to the largest talk that ever talked at the time. When Street Fighter 2 is played in tournaments today, it is likely this version, and the combat mechanics are still used in modern fighting games. From super moves, overheads, tech throws, special normals, there really was no topping things, and Capcom knew it. As perfect as it was, unfortunately the series was getting long in the tooth. I mean, Guile has been going home to be a family man, Ken has been getting married, and Zangief has been dancing for the past 3 years. Capcom must have thought so too, because for the next 4 years they experimented with the Street Fighter formula like a college co-ed going through a phase, especially with the Versus, Alpha, and EX series, the contents of which are a bit out of scope for my current ramblings, so I guess I should just move along. After a lot of negotiation and headache, the Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1997, ending climate change. But, more importantly, Capcom finally, mercifully, counts to 3. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, wait, put that down. No, this isn't what I asked for. No, this isn't what anyone asked for. Where are the original characters that we got to know? Holy shit, what the fuck is with this parry system?
Look how they mess with my boy.
I remember thinking, okay, Capcom will fix things. They like to release 30 versions of the same game and slowly iterate. But that wasn't meant to be. Street Fighter 3, the new generation, was just that. It was for a new generation of players. I guess I'll just move on, like most people did in 1997. Hey, you ever open a Christmas present and go, what the fuck is this? And then toss the gift down the stairs? Well, I didn't, because I wasn't raised by animals. That's what I wanted to do in 1999 when I first played Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Fight for the Future. This was it. This was supposed to be the Street Fighter 2 Turbo and fix everything. It didn't. I still didn't like the controversial parry system, which seemed to eliminate the projectile. In the original Street Fighter 2 series, a mini metagame would occur where people would have fireball projectile fights, and strategies developed around the fireball corner trap. The game I spent my whole life playing just told me I'm doing it wrong, and I wanted more of the same, even though I said I didn't. The biggest issue I had were the characters. Those original 8 World Warriors and 4 bosses were must-haves. Street Fighter 2 released in '91, and that cast of 12 classic characters can still be found in the latest release 30 years later. But in '97 to '99, Capcom decided they didn't need the cast that built the franchise. Instead, we got a Circus Soleil reject in Necro, a bargain bin combination of Dhalsim and Blanca. There were several releases of the Street Fighter 3 series, and each of them continued to add additional characters to the who's who of I don't give a fuck. The final iteration of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike released with my favorite of these losers, Remy. Just take one look at Remy, who was a discount Charlie, who was in essence a discount Guile. Look at the character design of this guy. With his horseshoe leather jacket, he's the edgiest of edgelords. I've been trying to decipher this conversation for a decade. He accuses Alex of being selfish, but all Alex said was he doesn't know why he fights. Alex never called himself a warrior. He's just a confused guy with amnesia that Remy picks a fight with, while yelling about how he won't forgive his dad. We have a term for these people. Crazy. He's too cool to care about anything, but also too depressed to get out of bed. He wears sunglasses indoors, and a leather jacket in 100-degree weather. He's the first kid to show you his knife collection, and he wants you to know that he isn't like other guys. He thinks he's smarter than others, but lacks the self-awareness to understand that he isn't ahead on the bell curve on the merits, but just thinks everyone else is behind it. He should be the poster boy for I'm 14 and This Is Deep. He probably thinks any music released within the last 5 years isn't saying anything. He can only communicate through his paintings, but also complains that no one understands him and that they just don't get it. He's too busy raging against the machine to help out on group projects. Hell, he's basically a protoform of a school shooter. He needs help, and he should probably be on a few lists, like No Fly and No Contact to start. Let's talk about the music. On release, I remember thinking the music in Street Fighter 3 felt off, coming after the clear and crisp music that was Street Fighter 2. In comparison, the soundtrack to the Street Fighter 3 games was muddled. It was like a cook who decided to use all the spices in the cabinet because they were there. Did the music director walk through a construction site banging on a soup can and trip over some aluminum tubes, a car rim, and say, "Yes, this is the direction I'm gonna go in"? Sure, music is subjective and no reasonable person would take my comments as fact, and I never said I was fair and balanced. All I'm doing is asking questions. But seriously, listen to Ken's Street Fighter 2 theme from '94. And then, Ken's theme from Street Fighter 3 in '97. I know which one I be blasting when it's 3 a.m. and I'm running red lights trying to outrun my memories with a tall boy taped to my head. I know I'm being harsh, but I'm trying to say the issue is that Street Fighter 3's character stage themes don't serve to highlight the traits of the character. When you listen to Ken's theme from Street Fighter 2, you can almost hear Ken's smirk and arrogance coming through. The music is fast, aggressive, high energy, and almost a little bit reckless. Just like every rush down, dragging, punching flowchart Ken that you might run into online. Okay, I can tell you're not convinced. Here's one more example. When you listen to Guile's theme, you can taste American exceptionalism and get the desire to celebrate putting your socks on before your shoes. Prior to hearing this song, I had healthcare. But now, I have something even better. I have the unshakable confidence that I am number one. After Third Strike, it would take 9 years before Capcom would release another Street Fighter. The Street Fighter 3 series was considered a commercial failure. However, not everything can be laid at the feet of the unknown and forgettable cast of characters, the music, or the challenging learning curve. It was unfortunately released when the battle between arcades and consoles were heating up. Consumer tastes were changing, and the bubble of fighting games was about to pop. But, much like children of divorce, it wasn't your fault, but you certainly didn't help things. In retrospect, none of that matters. And it's been a long road getting from there to here. Those were
small words from a small being trying to attack what he doesn't understand.
I never would have thought that 30 years later, in a post-COVID America, I would come back to the game and realize that I actually enjoy it. The game is beautifully animated, and in my opinion, represents the best sprite work from the time. In 1999, the world was moving towards polygons, but Street Fighter 3 Third Strike gave us one last ride on the 2D Express, and it was beautiful. The stages going back to New Generation were great, except for Guile's stage. That stage can die in a fire. Speaking of Guile was also, in my opinion, the first time we saw a boss, like a real boss. Imagine thinking Bison was serious business, only to find out that this guy just casually resurrects himself whenever he dies.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
This is bullshit. Okay, fine, one more time.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I'll talk with you again.
I realized in preparation for this retrospective that the music and character selection were convenient scapegoats when faced with an upheaval of what I knew. Quite frankly, I didn't put in the effort to get good, and that's on me, which turned me off to the entire series. Change is hard to deal with, whether it's the same-sex marriage, gender pronouns, or fight mechanics. It isn't easy for the closed-minded to adapt or to change what works for them. I remember thinking the 2-button throw being literally the worst thing ever, which superseded the tech throw as literally the worst thing ever. I didn't know it at the time, but the 2-button and tech throw would open up strategies that I would be using to this day. The parry system, looking back 30 years later, it's fun. I can't speak from the vantage point of the FGC gods, but down here in the mud, surrounded by the has-beens and never-wases, it adds to the depth of the game. I now realize the fight mechanics are where the game truly shined. Like all Street Fighter games, it was hard to master. However, the skill gap between someone new and seasoned was big. I mean really, really big. Seriously, the gap between someone who knew what they were doing and someone just picking up the game might never have been as big as it was in Street Fighter 3. In part, that's because of the introduction of the parry system. Normally, you could just hold down back and turtle as your only defensive option. All you did was block and dodge. Simple enough. With the introduction of the parry mechanic, it added a third option that was available to every character that, when executed correctly, enabled a perfect deflection of the enemy's attack, giving you frame advantage and a chance to blow someone up with a combo. However, it was locked behind the skill and execution and mind games. It added to the satisfaction as not only did you beat the person standing next to you, but you truly downloaded them. There's about a 6-frame window where you can execute a parry, by tapping forward on your controller or joystick into an opponent's attack right when it would have connected with your character. At 60 frames per second, this gives the player about a tenth of a second to recognize an attack and execute the parry. The risk and reward was balanced on the head of a pin, and simultaneously subverted the concept of push away to defend, while testing the fighter's will to welcome an attack in the hopes of reversing it. This balance came to a head in perhaps the greatest moment in FGC history. Daigo Umehara, Japan's best Street Fighter player, faced off against America's best, Justin Wong. Fans would call it Evo Moment 37. Street Fighter 3 also introduced the EX system to the series, having made its way over from Capcom's spooky Darkstalker games. An EX attack allows the player to spend a part of their super bar to power up their attacks with an extra button push. This is a game mechanic that we take for granted now in many fighting games. But on release, this was a very novel concept, not seen in many games, and definitely not seen in any games Capcom didn't make. New characters, new strategies, new moves, new stages, new music, new systems, and still Street Fighter 3 wasn't done. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike added the ability to pick your path through the arcade mode, letting you choose your opponents and stages on the way to getting your shit wrecked by Guile. And it had a grading system, so you could see exactly how bad you did in each bout. Going back and making this retrospective has let me see Street Fighter 3 in a whole new light. When Capcom made it to that magic number 3, they didn't just do some palette swaps. They evolved the template for future fighting games. Maybe it's not regarded by the general audience as an all-time classic like Street Fighter 2, but if you think about it, it isn't a classic because it's still actively relevant today. It's the birth of modern Street Fighter, and you can play it again without feeling like you got into a time machine, playing your grandpa's Atari or something. You could start it up, take what you did playing it, and apply it directly to something like Street Fighter V, no problem. Street Fighter 3 holds up, and has all the elements of which we now expect and take for granted. It made me realize that I missed out on a great game in its heyday. It took me a while to come around to Street Fighter 3 and accept it for what it is. You know, kind of like a son with an alternative lifestyle. Don't get me wrong, I still stand by the criticisms I had with the game back in the 90s, but I've come to believe that Street Fighter 3 is greater than the sum of its parts, and more than deserves the acclaim from those who played it. If Street Fighter 2 is the soul, then Street Fighter 3 is the body, the substance and structure that you can base any future Street Fighter on. Thanks for sitting in on my video game therapy session. I can't believe you made it this far, it's really appreciated. I'd love to hear from you though. What are your thoughts on Street Fighter 3? Do you have any games that you grew to like over time? Or how about the opposite? Let me know in the comments.